I've spent over $50,000 on property education, invested more than 1,500 hours researching markets, and experienced everything from nightmare tenants and crazy repair bills to now building a portfolio of 7 properties worth $4.8 million. Now, I also help other investors with the same goals as I did. And in this video, I want to share with you the biggest learnings over the last 8 years as both an investor and now as a buyer's agent. First things first, I want to address the elephant in the room. I didn't start off wealthy or privileged in any way. I started out just like most people, a young guy working hard to save a deposit so I could buy my first property and go from there. I read heaps of books, went to seminars and listened to hundreds of podcasts, but was still confused about what I was doing and just trying to figure it all out as I went along. Then I met a successful investor who somehow built a massive property portfolio that allowed him to retire early. He was actually a co-worker of mine. He worked in the legal department of the same floor, so I would bump into him in the kitchen and we'd often just have small talk. Until one day he casually mentioned how he was buying his dream home on the weekend. I joked that maybe I should have started working in the legal department. He just laughed and actually said it had nothing to do with his salary as a lawyer and it was all about having the right strategy. He never disclosed exactly how many properties he owned or how much his property was worth. That was always kept a secret. But he did share that it generated more than enough passive income to replace his full-time salary. I was immediately intrigued and I wanted to know how he did it. Let me tell you though, it hasn't been an easy journey. I experienced the massive highs that came with buying multiple properties and seeing their values skyrocket. And I've experienced some gut-wrenching lows like dealing with nightmare tenants and having to pay massive repair bills. It's like being punched in the face countless times by the property industry and living to tell the tale. But I've lived to tell the tale and I want to share some of the lessons. I'll start with the first one. Buy a house, not an apartment. The first property I purchased was an apartment in Western Sydney. It was a great suburb to invest in, probably the hottest suburb at the time. But after a few years, the value of the property didn't grow. So I did some digging. And what I realized was that over the last 30 years, houses have consistently outperformed apartments when it comes to price growth. And here's a few reasons why. The first one is oversupply. Apartments, especially in big complexes, face endless competition from all the similar units flooding the same block and area. It's hard to stand out when your unit is one of hundreds that look the same and rent for the same price. So whenever I'm looking for a tenant, there's always heaps of other properties in the same block or suburb that I'm competing with, and it's probably going to be the same when I eventually sell it. The second reason is that apartments are more likely to affect your cash flow. As I mentioned before, you have to pay strata fees and water rates that you can't pass on to your tenants. And every now and then, you'll be hit with a special levy from strata for major repairs. I actually recently had to fork out $12,000 to repair a roofing membrane that was damaged. But that's not even that bad. I've heard of cases where there was concrete cancer in an apartment block and each apartment owner had to come up with $120,000 to replace their balcony. And lastly, when you own an apartment, you don't own any land. This is quite a big deal because in the long term, land appreciates in value while buildings depreciate. At the end of the day, you want your investment to grow in value and you generally have a better chance of that when you have a house on a good-sized block of land. Now, while we're on the topic of apartments, there's a specific type that I really want to talk about: off-the-plan apartments. In my experience, talking to over 100 investors, those who bought off-the-plan apartments often tell me that the value of their property has barely moved or even dropped years later. Again, I spent more than 20 hours researching to try and understand exactly why, and what I found was that these investments are risky because you're paying tomorrow's prices today for an asset that doesn't physically exist yet. And there's no guarantee it will be worth what you paid for once it's built in a few years. The problem again is oversupply. Hundreds of identical apartments are being built and will be released to the public at the same time. And this is going to flood the area with the exact same product. And with so much supply and not enough demand, values are going to stay flat. House and land packages can carry similar risks if they're in brand new suburbs that are far out, have acres of vacant land and hundreds of identical homes popping up and hundreds more in the pipeline. Values may suffer from the oversupply. Having said that though, buying land to build a unique home in an established area with strong demand can absolutely be a solid investment play. It comes down to the location and making sure there's no oversupply. Now, I also want to mention that you should be very careful who you trust with this stuff. I often see so-called property consultants pushing off the plan apartments and house and land packages. These guys get paid huge commissions from the developer to sell brand new houses and apartments, often in areas with major development pipelines that risk flooding the market. But they still sell them by promoting things like tax depreciation and rental guarantees. And I'm talking around $40,000 in commissions per property. You can definitely say they're incentivized to sell. These brand new properties may sound very appealing, but these salespeople aren't necessarily looking out for your best interest. And my third biggest lesson is to choose a good property manager. I can't emphasize this enough. When I bought my first property, I decided to stick with the same cheap property manager to save money. They made some mistakes early on, and I considered upgrading to a more responsive and experienced company that charged higher fees. But being new to investing, I didn't want to spend more, so I gave that property manager another chance, hoping that they'd improve. Fast forward a few years later, that decision cost me a lot. The tenants moved out and trashed the place, which costed me over $7,500 in repairs, and my property manager let them get away with it. On top of that, there was no urgency for them to organize open homes to find a new tenant and organize repairs. And this costed me thousands of dollars in lost rent. Looking back, staying with them may have saved me a couple of $100s a year in fees, but in the end, it costed me 10 times more in lost rent and damages. So after that nightmare, I decided to never sacrifice property management quality to save money again. Now, I only use property managers who truly care about my property as much as I do. And that does come at a slightly higher fee, but I happily pay higher fees because an excellent property manager saves me exponentially more through better tenants, faster repairs, and making sure my property is well maintained. Despite all the hard lessons, I'm proud of where my portfolio is now, but I definitely think it could have been further along if someone else had shared some of the learnings with me before I jumped in. Even though I can't take away all the risks, my goal today was to share some of my learnings to help give new investors a head start in their journey. And that's what this channel is all about, paying my knowledge and experience forward. So if you want to learn more about how to get to where I am now, click that subscribe button, stay tuned for the next video.